Welcome, Dr. Stephen Hobbs here, sharing an introduction to the video that you're about to watch. It was actually sparked by an article in the Chronicles of Evidence-Based Mentoring. And the author was sharing a story around the COVID-19 pandemic and its influence on mentoring with youth. And the author used the term natural mentoring. And that got me to thinking about what is natural mentoring with regard to mentoring in the workplace. And so I posed the question to the four participants on the community conversation on mentoring May 13th, 2020 gathering. And this is the result. So enjoy. Is that I read a very interesting article and it just sparked something in me that I wanted to engage us with and sort of see where it takes us. So I'm not looking at this as a way to educate us, more is to explore and discover this topic and see what unfolds for us. And I'm just going to ask a question first, then I'll link it to the article so you understand where it came from. And I believe that will spark some things. And I know that what it did for me is it brought a very, very interesting insight to my foreground, to my consciousness that I had let slip. And I think it has great meaning in today's world with this notion of the pandemic and COVID-19. But to start off with, I'm just going to ask us to explore, what do we think natural mentor or natural mentoring is about? What does that term bring forward for you? And the easiest way for me to do this is if you unmute yourself, then I know you're going to go for it, and we can all see the mute function, and just go for it rather than me saying, Yvonne, Doug, Martin, instead of me doing it from that perspective, just unmute and go for it.
My understanding is that what you're talking about is a quality that comes to somebody naturally. In other words, he doesn't have to undergo any training, any coaching or whatever. He just does it as part of his, really in his DNA, as it were. That's my understanding.
I would agree with Martin and also expand on that. I mean, certainly women, I think, have natural nurturing capacity. And, as mothers, we're always looking to find ways of teaching our kids to, be the best that they can be. And obviously mentoring, with the focus being on learned experiences, storytelling, story sharing, is a natural thing, I think, that women tend to do and pass down wisdom from one generation to another. Much like baking a cake, the special ingredients for grandma's cake can be passed down, and it's an expansion of that with the mentoring conversation. And obviously there are a lot more elements to it, but it can be a very natural conversation.
So I'm going to feed off of Martin, and I'm going to take us back to the long-standing debate over great leaders are born or great leaders can develop over a period of time. And I think it's much the same, if you want to equate the two, it's much the same for great mentors. Are they born that way, or is that something that they acquire, the knowledge, skills, abilities, attributes, all of those elements over a period of time?
So I believe that what we're sharing here at the moment is this notion of the person, the characteristic of the person. Yvonne sort of moved a little bit into the process, so person, process, okay? So when we think of natural mentoring, the process, what might that also bring to the foreground for you?
Well, I think, expanding on what I mentioned earlier, humanity isn't going to survive unless we share wisdom from one generation to another. So I think that process we know it's been around as a formal process for hundreds of years. But I think that's built in. It's built into who we are and our desire for survival.
I think also what you're referring to, Yvonne and Stephen, is that you start off with what you are strong at, but also you are open-minded in order to embrace other ideas and other processes that may come to you based on discussions or based on consultations or whatever, because you are born with actually even if you have all those qualities, they can be limited or limiting. But are you open-minded in order to be able to embrace ideas that you're getting from other people as you observe them and actually make it part of the tools that you have so that you can become more effective in mentoring naturally?
Well, one of the things then that I'll do is I'll share with you the article, and I put it in the chat function. It comes from the Chronicle of Evidence-Based Mentoring. This is out of one of the universities in the States, and I subscribe to it because I want to get a little bit of an understanding of what they're talking about. Now, the Chronicle of Evidence-Based Mentoring tends to lean into the world of youth. So I want to make that connection. And this article certainly speaks about the youth situation. But what it did is it got me to do a little spin about, well, what is it that COVID-19 and the pandemic is doing around mentoring? And the way that they're using natural here, and then I went and did some research on the internet, is that natural mentoring is another term for informal mentoring. So what I'm putting forward is natural mentoring is to youth as informal mentoring is to the workplace. That's one of the ways that I'm looking at it, right, when I'm reading this. So I'm just wondering, it's not that I'm asking you to read this and comment on this at this point in time, but bringing out this notion of natural to youth and informal to workplace. Any thoughts about that connection at this point?
Go ahead, Yvonne.
When I think about children, I mean, I have a special needs son, so he asks different kinds of questions perhaps than your average child. But I mean, they have that natural curiosity, so they naturally want to know how to do things, the shortcut, the best way to do it. So they're naturally thirsty for knowledge anyway. So it is more natural, I would think, and that fits for me in terms of natural. I'd love to hear Doug's opinion on formal versus informal mentoring programs and happening in the workplace. I'm not sure if you have any stats or data around that. But I think for great leaders, it naturally happens anyway, that they want to develop their team, they want to share experiences, they want to connect people with others across the organization, reduce silos, build connection overall. It's probably posed more questions than it has given answers, right?
I think the informal one, to me, is more or less like it's an obligation in a way. It's something that we must provide, particularly to the youth, so that they can grow into the type of individuals we want them to grow to. And I've got a practical experience here. It may sound very basic. This is really what we're talking about. We have a grandson. He's now 3 years old. He's been wearing his nappy, and it actually didn't occur to me, although I've got children of my own. But we needed him to graduate away from the nappy into sort of telling us when he wants to go to the toilet so that we can take him there. And it's been a challenge to us because, you know, he doesn't tell you. And by the time you realize he has wet his pants and it is embarrassing to him, you can actually see it on his face. And it is also embarrassing to us. And then when you take him to the toilet and you put him there, he sits there for forever and ever. Then he sort of starts crying out because he doesn't want to disobey the parents by leaving the toilet. So he starts crying out to, you know, daddy, daddy, daddy. And then if daddy is not responding, he said, anyone, anyone? So, you know, you feel so guilty because you've literally put this kid in jail, as it were. And you sort of feel that you need to go out. So the issue is, how are you supposed to mentor him? And who is supposed to mentor him? Is it the male? Is it the female? And exactly how do you do it? You know, so it's a real problem. So that is an informal way of mentoring, which is very important because this kid has got to, before he goes to school, hopefully in September, he has to be able to manage his toilet. So I don't know if this experience is relevant in our discussion.
All perspectives are welcome. That's why we're having the community conversation, is to get around and get in there and sort of see what unfolds for us as we work through it. So thank you, Martin.
We've had some discussions on this calls before between the different types of learning modalities, you know, coaching, mentoring, counseling, training, managing, etc. I don't think we ever explored the difference between mentoring and parenting. So that, I mean, that might be an interesting piece to consider. I mean, it's still knowledge transfer for the betterment of the individual who's learning the new skill, and yet I would think that, you know, there is an art and a science to mentoring that wouldn't benefit by perhaps being diluted with that flavor of parenting. I'd love some other opinions.
So,
Okay, Doug.
yeah, I've done a bit of research around the whole idea of mentoring being in the family environment. So what's required to be able to do that, and then as the mentee progresses through their life, they are then involved in mentoring at the school level, where it becomes part of the curriculum in the school, and then from there it's moved on to higher education, and from there into the workplace. And what I've seen, and it was similar to the country of Bhutan, who has a culture of happiness, and it starts right at the very early age, and it grows as the people get older and older and older, all the way through until their last breath. And I sort of saw that it was much the same. And in some of the conversations that I had with people who are, you know, obviously leaders in their country, and that's something that they would like to be able to see, is that we have natural mentoring, which to me that's more about the informal aspect of mentoring, just because it happens, it evolves, it's not forced, it's not mandated, it evolves. But I think for mentoring to get to where it needs to get, it needs to be recognized and become a way of life. And so by a way of life, I mean, it starts right at the family level and progressively grows and continues to grow all the way right through till sort of our last breath of air.
So this notion of natural mentoring is that I put a little picture up when I was advertising the community conversation, and I talked about I was asking about the naturalness of mentoring, and for me, naturalness is the state and quality of being natural. Okay, ness, as a prefix. And it was spurred by the article. And I think what we're doing is we're, in our own roundabout way, we're talking about this notion of being natural, whether it's natural within the family and who would do the mentoring, to being natural and open-minded to the mentoring process. There's lots of ways of looking at this notion of being natural and having natural characteristics. And I find that all fascinating, and I think that we're doing great in terms of exploring it. But what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everyone, is I'd like to take a couple of ideas that came out of that article that I posted, right? And it spurred something in me to think about this notion of, mentoring in the workplace, if we could, right? And about being a mentor and this notion of being a natural mentor. And if we go to the workplace from the perspective, okay, there's formal and informal. So one of the characteristics of natural mentoring that I've been looking at is that the youth get to choose who they would like to mentor. It's not assigned to them. The same thing is about informal. You can go find someone in the workplace. And what that did was it sparked the following. There are workplaces now where people are not in the workplace, they're scattered to their homes, okay? So what happens is your mentor that you may have had in the workplace that was either assigned to you, right? Or you chose, is I really want to have you as my mentor because I'd like to learn about your position, right? There's a bit more formalization that takes it. That kind of conversation is not open as much now because you're not in the workplace together. Therefore, there's a lot more organization has to happen to maintain that mentor relationship that once was, very close in the workplace. So that's one aspect, okay? There's the other aspect of the mentoring that takes place around the water cooler. Okay, it's sort of gone. It's not like you're walking down the hallway, you can talk to someone about something for the distance, right? And get a 30-second little mentoring, tap into the lived experience kind of storyline. That is sort of not quite there, right? And therefore, this notion of, okay, Zoom, thank you, Zoom. Okay, we have to do some of our mentoring now through Zoom. So this pandemic, in some ways, has taken away some of the naturalness of mentoring. And I'd like you to just explore that with what I've shared with you, because if you think about it from the schools, all of a sudden the peer-to-peer, the teacher mentoring and all that, bang, gone. Now it's back in the home, right? And even the grandparents have to talk through the window. There's this naturalness that has shifted for us. And what does that mean for us when we think about it from this Zoom and technology pandemic perspective? So I know I've shared a lot there, but just jump in. I'm just curious.
But that's where it was at the beginning. This whole idea of school and so on, I don't know when it started. But training, and you actually can call it mentoring, was always a family affair. Not just the immediate family, because anyway, I grew up in an African village, so my experience is different. So the African child was not a child of the parents, the immediate parents. It was a child of the village, a child of the community. So if you found that child doing something that was not supposed to do, it was actually your responsibility to, in fact, even mete out punishment to that child. And, nobody would sanction you for that, because it is your responsibility as part of the village, as part of the community, to make sure that, you guide that child in the right direction. So we are back to the beginning, except now we have technology. So how do we now make the technology friendly, other than making the technology Okay, because there's an extreme. If you rely too much on technology, then that personality aspect, that humanity aspect of it will disappear. And you may actually end up with different individuals altogether in a couple of years' time. I don't know. You're just inciting us to say so many things.
No, it's a great point, Martin. A great point is I hadn't clicked into that, right? And so thank you for that sort of reminder is, whoa, hang on a minute. Maybe sit back in my chair here. So thank you for that perspective.
I think that, depending on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, and also whether you are an entrepreneur or a employee, because we tend to think differently, I think that the tendency for you to still operate in your normal fashion, you just switch gears on the medium. So now the medium is online instead of walking down the corridor. If you have a desire to share and help other people grow, you'll find a way to do it. And I mean, I've been on Zoom for years, so this was a very easy transition for me. Whereas I know that my husband, who's working from home, is very much feeling like, he's missing that connection. And so for kids, yeah, we've had a few items on the news just this week talking about, kids are saying we miss our friends and we miss, the school environment. And yet I've seen so much growth happen over the summer when there's a summer break from school and kids are free to experience life and play and try things out, which is more what they would be doing in a mentoring environment with a great mentor, giving them the freedom to grow at their own pace with guidance. That I don't think one thing is, I don't think either is right or wrong. I think we've just had this new awareness that we can put the focus on it and leverage the power of technology now that we didn't have before to cross greater borders and different and distances.
Okay, and all this is very true, and it's something that brings this depth of awareness, right? This notion of naturalness, that the state and quality of being natural. How can we still be natural in our mentoring approach, right? In these times, understanding history, but also understanding how this technology is influenced. There's still that element of learning that is taking place. And I found that to be fascinating because of what this article sparked in me. Remember I shared with you, I said there's something that all of a sudden went bang for me. And Doug, it leans into the journey mentor storyline. Let me share with you what I'm thinking here, and then certainly jump in. From this natural mentoring, informal mentoring perspective, and you have taken on a formal mentoring perspective, either way. In this time of the pandemic and anxiety and questions of what is going on, all of a sudden the mentor may be facing more than the topic that they were being asked to mentor on, or helping the process because they have ideas that can help someone in a different domain, this notion of what's going on. Is that all of a sudden the mentor is put into a position where their own health may be in question. Okay, we sometimes don't think about, well, the mentor actually may be feeling something here, yet helping the mentee. So that's what came to mind, is all of a sudden, oh, hang on a minute. When you mentor, you're actually influenced by something like a pandemic as well. And I, it's sort of like, hang on a minute, it's true, right? And we're not necessarily talking about how do we help the mentor deal with the situation. So that's what sparked for me about this notion of naturalness and all the things that are happening. So thoughts about that element of this story?
Well, you've touched on a very interesting topic, and it's something that I know when we have the mentoring circle, we sometimes circle back. Unique choice of words. Circle back.
Can you just explain mentoring circle for those?
I can. So typically, what I've got in place is every second Saturday, for about an hour. We're now doing it virtual. We used to do it in person. But what happens is a group of us get together and I basically facilitate a discussion around all things mentoring. And so we have people from all different walks of life, some that are there to gain mentoring experience, some that are there to gain some tools, some tips, some tricks on how to deal with certain workplace situations that they're involved in that they may not know how to deal with. And so everybody is quite open and willing to pass on their wisdom and knowledge. But my job as the host or the facilitator is to guide the conversations to where it needs to go and to make sure that everybody gets a chance that gets a chance to contribute to it. So that's the mentoring circle.
Well, thanks for that. And I know I zipped you off your main thought, but please go back. But I think it was helpful, so appreciate it.
And now I'm trying to think what that thought was.
Well, it's the notion of the mentor's health as well.
Got it. Now I'm back to where I was supposed to be. So one of the things, and that's where the mentoring circle come into play, was to get those that are involved in mentoring to understand that it's all about self-care. They need to be able to take care of themselves first, because you don't bring as much value, if you bring any, if you're dealing with some skeletons in your own closet, so to speak. And so you need to be able to have the coping skills to be able to deal with some of that. And that, from a journey mentor perspective, if I'm working with somebody to try and guide them someplace, and I recognize that, there's some things we need to have a conversation about, we need to have those in order to make sure that that person has got the coping skills they need to be able to effectively put into practice the mentoring process and mentoring concepts that we're all comfortable or familiar with. And that can be the whole aspect of, is it natural or is it unnatural mentoring?
Yeah, and from the mentor's perspective, it's how to deal with the mentee, because if you're still doing what you agreed to do, but yet at the same time taking care of yourself, because there's some added variables here. Now, I appreciate you may be mentoring in a merger and acquisition, right? And that's influencing you as a mentor. But we're just talking about the pandemic at the moment and how that's influencing these mentoring arrangements. So thanks for that. Anything else you want to add to it?
No.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on this in terms of the mentor's health and the importance of it?
I think this is one of those topics that crosses over from, coaching to mentoring, where, I say in my book, you always have to put your own air mask on first before helping others. And from an energy standpoint, because I'm trained in Reiki, as some of you know, as well, you can't give from an empty place. So, always guiding to give from your place of overflow. So, last summer when my son got, he was in the hospital and had some medical challenges, I put my brakes on and said, look, I'm stepping back from some of the agreements that are in place that are wrapping up. I'm not putting my hand up again yet to be adding on extra mentoring or board work, because my bandwidth is refocused towards my family activities. So I think that as mentors, as long as we acknowledge that, yes, we're coming to the table fully ready and prepared, and keep that awareness, that's the important piece.
Well,
Stephen, that's an interesting point you've raised. Is there any experience that you can share? And the important thing is, basically what you're saying is, the mentor has to recognize his limit and therefore know where to stop and where to start. Is that the point you're trying to make here?
There's two elements to that, Martin. One is for the mentor is to understand the boundaries of their mentoring, because if they're dealing with a mentee that brings a story that leans into counseling, you got to know where that line is from the mentor to mentee. But also, I think what you're bringing up is that the mentor also has to have the self-concept, the self-awareness to go, whoops, something's not going well for me right now, and it may not be best for me to enter into my mentoring conversation. I may need to take a break because of something, and having that self-awareness perspective. So I think what you're bringing up is the notion of boundaries and how we see the boundaries of the mentoring. Doug, you want to jump in on this one? Because this is something you and I have talked about a lot in the Journey Mentor world.
I think that what needs to take place is that the mentor, and I'll use the Journey Mentor as the example, is you need to understand, as a Journey Mentor, you need to be able to understand where that boundary, where that line in the sand is, and you need to know, and you also need to have that support structure for yourself as well as for the mentee. And your support structure can be access to a stable full of trained professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, all of those that you can do a referral to. Now, when you do the referral, you don't give up the relationship. You still own the relationship with the person, and you're kind of there to walk with them on their journey. And I've gone through that. I'm working with a couple people that, in fact, I just had contact with one here in the last couple of days, and it was the situation there where wanting to make sure that we didn't cross over onto the other side of the mentoring relationship, that I made sure that I was able to recognize myself some of the telltale signs that this person needed additional help, and then to be able to say, I think we need to explore this type of counseling, or that I just leave it wide open, that I think we need to explore some other professional help. Are you okay with that? And be able to move forward with that.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Martin, are we getting into the answer to your question, where you're going, or do you want to add more here?
What is now coming out? It's much bigger than what I thought it was, because at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this session is basically saying each of us is going to be confronted at some point with a situation where you have to be a mentor in some instance. And are you well equipped? Are you ready for it? Will you do it properly? Is that the message that is coming out? Am I getting the message correctly?
What you've touched on is kind of one of my long-standing, we'll call it a pet peeve, but it's not a pet peeve, but it's the aspect of that we need to provide training. There needs to be training of some sort for those mentors to be able to deal with, different situations. And from my perspective, what I've seen over the last 10 plus years of being involved in this is that it's training that evolves. It's a knowledge base that needs to evolve as you get more and more involved in the practice of mentoring, and you're doing things where, my best way to describe it is we created a hierarchy of mentoring where we have mentor, great mentor, extraordinary mentor, and your knowledge continues to grow as you progress up that ladder.
I'm learning.
That's great. I appreciate where you're going with it, Martin, and that's why one of the action outcomes, where there's a couple of action outcomes that link into this when you go to get your certification as a competent mentor, is to really be able to unpack, which is one of the words we use, like deeper and richer in the IRC, is unpack this notion of your own self-concept, your confidence, your awareness, reflection on what's taking place, is because you are tapping into your lived experience. That's what the mentee is doing, and sharing from that. There's another topic I'd like to explore maybe on another day, and I'm still working it up, is the notion of the lived experience you're tapping into. Is that good gossip or something more sinister because of bias, right? The lived experience is a sense of, here's some good gossip and here's ideas because I'm sharing stories from what I've done. Or is there something in behind it that could be a little bit sinister because you haven't worked out your biases, which is another one of the action outcomes, is, to tackle your bias as well. Because I think this comes back to this notion of being natural. So that when you show up to be a mentor in the mentoring arrangement and being as natural as possible, is that not what we were asking mentors to be?
I think that there has to be a natural flow to the conversation if it's going to be a great learning opportunity. So building trust, building rapport, not bringing forward those biases, great listening skills. I mean, there's all of the things that are in that competence assessment are really, really important. Because if the conversation doesn't flow, it's stilted and there's big pauses and it's an uncomfortable silence. I mean, as a coach, I use the power of silence intentionally. And yet, when the conversation feels awkward, then it crosses over where the other person isn't likely to be able to gain the knowledge that you're trying to impart.
And I appreciate this, and we could come back and explore this a bit more, the notion of natural mentor, natural mentoring, the naturalness of mentoring, the nature of mentoring. There's lots of things we can continue to unfold here. But I thought what was really interesting, okay, and this is sort of like a little side note, I went and found that there is a website called Natural Mentor. And I went, oh, great. And I jumped into it. And what it is about essential oils and what it means to take care of your health.
That's a good one.